This is part 68 of SQL Server tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss optional parameters in SQL Server stored procedures. We'll be using this table TBL employee for this demo. Here is the SQL script to create and populate this table with some sample data. I'll have the script available on my blog in case if you need it. Now, I want to write a stored procedure, and this stored procedure should allow me to search employees within this table TBL employee by their name, email, age, and gender. So first, let's go ahead and create the procedure. So create proc and then the name of the stored procedure. Let's call it SP search employees. And we want to be able to search by name, email, age, and gender. So let's go ahead and have 4 parameters. Name is of type nvarchar. Similarly, let's add parameters for email, gender, and age. Email is also of type nvarchar. Gender is also of the same type, but age is of type integer. So let's change the data type to int as begin end. Now let's implement the body of the stored procedure. Now we want to select all the rows and columns from table TBL employee, but we need to apply the where clause because we want to be able to filter by the provided name, email, gender, and age. So where name equals at name, whatever value that is present within that name at name parameter, and gender equals at gender, email equals at email, age equals at age. Alright, so let's go ahead and create the stored procedure now. So we have the stored procedure SP search employees created, and this procedure expects these 4 parameters. All these parameters at the moment are mandatory. Look at this. If I try to execute this procedure without supplying values for any of the parameters, look at what's going to happen. We have an error. Procedure function SP search employees expects parameter at name which was not supplied. So we need to supply values for all of these parameters. So here the parameters are mandatory. So how do we make them optional? To make them optional, all we need to do is specify default values for these parameters. So here I'm going to specify null as the default value for name. Okay, but you can actually specify any default value that would make sense, according to the requirements of your application. So I'm going to specify null as the default value for all of the parameters. Now let's alter this. Execute. Now look at this. When I execute the stored procedure, look at this. At the moment I am not supplying values for any of the parameters. But look at that. I don't get any data. That's fine. We'll fix that in just a bit. But at least we don't get that error, that name parameter requires value or email parameter requires value. We don't have those errors because these parameters are optional because we have specified default values for them. So when you specify default values and then if you don't supply values for those parameters, and when you execute the stored procedure at execution time, the default values will be used. Okay, now why are we not getting data? Because we don't have name, gender, email, age, where these column values are null, and that's the reason why we don't get the data. But then if you want to return all the rows from the table, if we don't supply values for these parameters, then we need to modify our where clause. So I'm going to include a condition here where name equals at name or at name is null. Okay, similarly let's go ahead and add the same condition for the rest of the parameters that we have here. So gender equals at gender or at gender parameter itself is null. Similarly where email equals at email or at email is null. Age equals at age or age parameter is null. So basically if one of these conditions is true, that's fine. So let's alter this procedure, execute this now. Look at this. At the moment we are not supplying values for any of the parameters, but I get all the rows because we don't want the filter to be applied if I don't supply values for the parameters. Now let's say I want to get all the male employees. Then let's specify the value for this gender parameter. So gender parameter is going to have a value of male. So now if we execute this, we should only get male employees from the table gender equals from table TPL employee. So look at that, we only get male employees. Now out of the male employees, I want only the employee who has an age of 29. Then we can pass value for that parameter where age equals 29, and if we execute this, notice that we should only get one employee. Okay, so here we made the stored procedure parameters optional by specifying default values. Alright, okay, so how do you make a stored procedure parameters optional? Simply specify default values, and here name, email, age and gender, we have made them optional. And in the where clause, we are checking if the parameter value is null, so that if we don't supply a value for these parameters, we will get all the rows from the database table. And we have also tested the stored procedure. Now let's actually look at where we can use a stored procedure like this. Now I might have a web application where we want to allow the end users to be able to search employees by name, email, age and gender. So this form here can actually use that stored procedure. Let's quickly design a web form and then make use of the stored procedure. So here I have an ASP.NET web application. Here I have webform1.aspx. First of all, let's design this web form. So I need a table, and within that I need 1, 2, 3 and 4 TDs. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a table, and let's set font family to Arial. So font family is Arial, and let's also set border for this table. Border is 1 pixel, solid black color. Alright, and then within this table we need a TR. Okay, look at that. The first TR, I want this text search employees to be spanning across all the 4 TDs. So what I'm going to do here is have 1 TD and set call span to 4. And then if you look at this, I also want this line here under search employees, and to achieve that, what I'm going to do here is for this TD I'm going to set a style, maybe something like border bottom to 1 pixel solid black, so that we get that line. Okay, and then what do we need there? We need text search employees, and let's wrap that inside a bold tag. So search employees, and then let's create another TR, and within the second table row we need 4 TDs. Okay, so let's include 4 TDs. So that's 1 TD, 2, 3 and 4. Okay, within the first TD let's include a bold tag, and then we need this text name, a text box, and then this text email, and then text box in the respective TDs that you see here. So first is name, and then within the third TD we want maybe email, and in this TD we need a text box to enter the name of the employee. So let's quickly drag and drop a text box control, and we also need a text box within this TD. Alright, now let's make another table row, because we need another 4 TDs where we can have age, text box, gender, and then a drop down list for gender. So let's paste that here, and then let's change these names meaningfully. So the name text box, let's actually call it txt name. Email text box, let's call it txt email. And then in the second row we want age and gender. So this is going to be age, this is going to be gender, and maybe let's call this text box txt age, and this one txt gender. Alright, now actually for gender we need a drop down list, not a text box control. So let's drag and drop a drop down list control here. And let's call this drop down list as DDL gender. And let's hard code the value. So if you look at genders within our table TBL employee, we have male and female. So let's include two list items. So ASP list item, text is going to be male and value is also going to be male. Similarly, let's have another text item for female. Alright. But the other thing is, apart from male and female, we also need this first list item which says any gender. So let's add another list item, and I want that to be the first one. Text here is going to be any gender which the end user sees, but then the value is going to be -1. This value we will use to check if the end user has selected anything within the drop down list. So -1 for any gender. Alright. So at this point, if you look at the design of our form, we should have got, the first one, the first tier, second tier, and third tier. Finally, we want another tier where we need the search button, and then another tier to hold the grid view control to display employees data. Okay, alright, so let's flip it to the source mode. Now I want another tier here. Let's set the column span to 4. And within that we need a button control, so let's drag and drop that, and maybe let's call this btn search, and then the text on that is going to be search. And then we need another tier where we can place a grid view control to display employees. Okay, so let's drag and drop grid view control. That should be under data, and maybe let's call this GV employees, grid view employees. Okay, so at this point we have the design for our web form. So when I click this button, that's when we need to write the code to invoke the stored procedure and then retrieve the data, bind it to the grid view control. So first of all, I'm actually going to write a private function. So private void, and let's call this get data. So this is the function which is going to execute the stored procedure, get the data, and then bind it to the grid view control. Alright, the first thing here is to import the required namespaces. We need system.data. We need system.data.sql client, and we need system.configuration. Okay. And in our web.config file, I already have a connection string. The name of the connection string is dbcs, and that is pointing to my local database called sample. Okay, and I'm using integrated security. Alright, so first we need to read that connection string from web.config file, and to do that, string connection string is equal to configuration manager dot connection strings of, what is the name of our connection string? dbcs, database connection string. So I want the connection string. So once we have the connection string, we need to create a SQL connection object. So I'm going to wrap the SQL connection object inside an using statement so that it gets disposed of automatically. I don't have to close the connection explicitly. So new SQL connection, we need to specify the connection string. So let's pass the connection string. Alright, now the next step is to create our SQL command object. So SQL command cmd equals new SQL command. So what is our SQL command here? Nothing but a stored procedure. And what's the name of our stored procedure? sp search employees. So let's pass that to the SQL command object, and then we also need to specify the connection object that we are going to use to execute this command. Okay, now this command is a stored procedure, so we need to tell that to the command object. So command.command type equals command type dot stored procedure. Okay, the next important step is to attach the parameters to this command object. Now if you look at this form, these parameters could be optional. So if there is no value for name, email, age, gender, if there are no values selected, or if the user hasn't typed anything into these text boxes, then there's no point in attaching those parameters to our stored procedure. Okay, so first of all we need to check if there is some text in let's say for example name text box. If the text is not equal to string.empty, meaning there is something, only then go ahead, create a parameter and then attach that to the command object. So I'm going to create a SQL parameter, and maybe let's call this name parameter equals new SQL parameter, and then we have to specify the name of the parameter and then the value for that. So basically I'm going to use this overloaded version. So what is the name of the parameter? Name parameter is at name, and where is the value going to come from? It's going to come from text name text box. Okay, so we have the parameter here. We need to attach this to the command object. So we have the command object is cmd dot parameters dot add. We will add our parameter object. Okay, in a similar fashion we need to attach parameters, the rest of the parameters. So let's make a copy of this one just to speed things up. So this one is for name, next is email. So if txt email.text, if it's not equal to string.empty, then let's call this maybe email parameter is equal to, what is the name of the parameter? It's called email, and where are we going to get the value from? From email text box, and let's add this to the command object. Okay, and next age. So if txt age.text not equal to string.empty, then get the value from that text box. Name of the parameter is going to be age, and let's call this age parameter. And finally, drop down list for gender. So if you remember, what is the default value that we have specified for gender? The default value is -1. So if the selected value is not -1, only then attach gender parameter to the command object. So here we are going to check the drop down list selected value. So ddl gender dot selected value, if it is not equal to -1, then the end user has selected either male or female. In that case, create a gender parameter. So the name of the parameter is gender, and where are we going to get the value from? We're going to get the value from drop down list. So ddl gender dot selected value should give us the value that the user has selected. And then finally we need to pass that to this method. Similarly here, age parameter needs to be passed. Alright, so at this point we have created our SQL connection object, prepared our command object, specified that the command type is stored procedure, and then we have associated all the parameters with the command object. The next step is to open the connection. So connection.open, and then execute the command. So command.execute reader, and then whatever this method is going to return, set that as the data source for our grid view control. So gv employees dot data source equals whatever we are going to get back from the database, and invoke the data bind method. Alright, so all of this code is present inside this private function get data. So when the page is first loaded, so if it's not an initial, if it's an initial get request, so if it's not a post back, meaning if it is the initial GET request for this web form, go ahead and invoke getData function. Even when I click the button, go ahead and invoke getData function. Okay, so with all these changes, let's go ahead and run this. Now we need to optimize this code a little bit because there's a lot of repeating code here. Look at this, all these lines are repeating themselves. We'll fix that in just a bit. But then first let's look at if our search functionality works as expected. Look at this, when the web form loads first, it displays all the employees. Now let's say I want only male employees. I select male, click search. Look at that, I only get male employees. If I want female, click search, I get female employees. If I don't select any of the filters, search, I get all employees. Okay, if I want male and I want employees whose age is maybe 35, click search. Look at that. Oh, don't we have an employee whose age is 35? Let's see. We don't have any male employee whose age is 35. That's the reason why we don't have any data. So let's see 33. Click search. Look at that, I get that one employee. Alright, now let's optimize this code a little bit more, because I don't want this repeating code here within our getData function. So let's have another function here, maybe, which says, if you look at this piece of code, what are the varying pieces here? The varying pieces are the name of the parameter, the control which contains the value. Okay, those are the only two things that are changing, so we can pass those as parameters. And obviously we also need to have a reference to the command object, so we'll pass the command object, name of the parameter, and the control that contains the value as parameters to a function, and within that function we can have these two lines. So let's quickly optimize this code. So let's actually write it here. Maybe let's call it private void, maybe attach parameters, and then we need to specify the command object. So SQL command, maybe let's call it command, and the parameter name is string, so let's call it parameter name. And what else we need? We need the control that contains the value. Now here we can't specify either text box or drop down list because we have both of the controls, but I want to have only one parameter. So I'm going to use control here because both text box and drop down list inherit from control class. So I can use control parameter, and then as an argument I can either pass a text box control or a drop down list control. And maybe let's call this control. Alright, so here what we are going to do is, look at this. This control can either be a text box control or a drop down list control. So first I'm going to check if control is text box, and if control is text box, what I'm going to do, I'm going to typecast that to text box, and then retrieve the text property and check if it is not equal to string.empty, because only then we should attach the command object. We should attach the parameter to the command object. So if that's the case, then to the command object, first of all we need to create the parameter. So SQL parameter, maybe let's call it parameter equals new SQL parameter, and then we need to specify the name of the parameter. So where are we going to get the parameter? It's coming in as a parameter, so that's the name of the parameter. And where is the value coming from? The value is going to come from the control itself. So if it's a text box, typecast it to text box and retrieve the text. So we have the SQL parameter there. The next step is to attach this parameter with this command object. So command dot parameters dot add. Let's add our parameter object. Okay, so this piece of code, since we have this piece of code, we can get rid of all these lines here. Okay, and instead invoke that function. Okay, what is that function? Attach parameters, and then obviously we need to specify the command object, which is nothing but cmday, and then the parameter name. So one of the parameter names is @name, and what is the control that is going to contain the parameter value? txt name, that's the text box. Okay, in a similar fashion we need to invoke that method for email, and the control that contains the value is txt email and gender, and the control that contains the value, not gender, sorry, it's age, because gender is a drop down list. So txt age. Alright, now we have another piece of code here left. Let's get rid of this as well. Now for gender, the control is a drop down list. So within our attach parameters function, I'm going to have an else if block here, and then we are going to check if control is drop down list. Then what we are going to do, we are going to typecast the control to be of type drop down list, and then we are going to check the selected value. If selected value is not equal to -1, that means the user has selected either male or female from the drop down list. In that case, what do we want to do? We want to do the same thing. So SQL parameter, the parameter equals to, where are we going to get the parameter name from? Again, that's coming into the function as a parameter, and then the control here is drop down list. So typecast that to drop down list, and the property is selected value. Okay, and we are adding that parameter to the parameters collection of the command object. Okay, now with this line we can get rid of this code here. Okay, and then let's invoke our function, attach parameters, command object, and then what is the name of your parameter? @gender, and where are you going to get the value from? DDL gender control. Alright, so this is a bit better because we have got rid of that repeating code. Now our function is much smaller. Okay, alright, so let's go ahead and run this once again and check if it continues to work in the same way. So when the web form first loads, we should get all data, but then if I say male, look at that, I get only male employees and 33 age, and I get that. Alright, that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.